heaven and earth, that's how it all began. Skies above, world below, lots of room, things could grow. Oh, such a wonderful pen.
Once upon a time, when the darkness came to light, shining here far. Moon by night, sun by day, what's it for?
To get through, get through, Father. I can't wait no more for you.
Okay. So that means that our whole solar system could be like one tiny atom in the fingernail of some other giant being. Oh, this is too much. That means that one tiny atom in my fingernail could be
one little tiny universe.
Could I buy some pot from you?
This is Infants on Thrones. The philosophies of men mingled with humor. We are the Core.
Welcome back to Infants on Thrones. I'm Glenn Ostland, and today is the day that... can I get a drum roll, please? Thanks. That was awesome. And today is the day that I finally release the long-teased, well past its prime SHONE episode. You know, from that book I talked about last December, A Short History of Nearly Everything, where a bunch of listeners volunteered to record their thoughts and questions as they read it, and then they sent it in to me so I could edit it all into one mind-blowing episode.
Could I buy some pot from you?
But, well, okay, here's the thing. I probably could have kept working on this thing forever. There's so much in here to think about, so many things to say, and I kept tripping over myself.
Could I buy some...
trying to think and say it all. But, I can't, so I just have to cut my losses and release it as it is in its mostly finished state. Now, I say it's mostly finished because I mostly integrated all of the listener comments into the main part of this episode, but I didn't do that for all of the listener comments, so you're going to get an extended Easter egg on this episode where you can hear the listener comments that didn't get integrated into the main episode, but they're still there at the end as an Easter egg. And I really hope that you aren't that one listener of Infants on Thrones right now who's going, wait a minute, they put additional content as Easter eggs at the end of these episodes? Because, yeah, we usually do. So anyway, here it is, at long last. A long time putting together a short history of nearly everything. Enjoy.
Part 1. Lost in the Cosmos. No matter how hard you try, you will never be able to grasp just how tiny, how spatially unassuming is a proton. It is just way too small. A proton is an infinitesimal part of an atom, which is itself, of course, an insubstantial thing. Protons are so small that a little dib of ink, like the dot on a printed eye, can hold something in the region of 500 billion of them. Rather more than the number of seconds contained in 500,000 years. Protons are exceedingly microscopic, to say the very least.
This is Kaylin.
I wanted to point out that I feel like protons are kind of the things that you kind of have to take on faith if you yourself have never seen one. Which, who has? Because technically, no one, not even scientists, have, seen a proton necessarily. So it's kind of weird because it's one of those things where it's like, if you can't see this with your naked eye, then, unless you're a scientist, you've probably not actually personally conducted these experiments. And so from there, you kind of have to just take it on authority of those scientists who came before you and conducted these experiments and saw the results and trust that what they're saying is true. On top of that, you kind of also have to take it on the authority of mathematicians who've worked out the math and said, nope, it works this way. So that's kind of where I think science can get a bit, I guess depending on who you are, it can get either sketchy or it can kind of further uphold your own cognitive bias when you run it up against religion and the idea of faith. But the main thing that science has going for it is that you can at least conduct experiments and see what happens, and most of the time get some kind of observable outcome.
Thanks for that, Kaylin. I hear what you're saying, but kind of like Obi-Wan Kenobi when he was on the Millennium Falcon on his way to the Death Star, as soon as you said the word faith, I
felt a great disturbance in the Force, as if millions of voices suddenly cried out in terror.
Shouting, no, that's a false equivalency. The faith required to accept religious consensus is not the same as the faith, if that's what you want to call it, that's required to accept scientific consensus. But, Kaylin, I get what you're saying, and it doesn't mean that you don't have a valid point, and it doesn't mean that it isn't worth exploring. So I want to spend a little bit of time talking about it. Also, you're not the only contributor to this project who mentioned the role of faith in accepting these ideas that are so hard to get our heads around, right? But I think a better word than faith would probably be trust when we're talking about the results of science or the scientific process. Trust is less emotionally charged than faith, so probably a better word to use. So faith, it's so charged, right? And what is the definition? It's things that are hoped for but not seen. Is that right? So I guess in the sense that protons and quarks and dark matter and a lot of other things that are being theorized about the universe, that they're not seen. Yeah, okay, they're not seen, but the evidence that those things exist and are out there and are interacting with other things is much more solid than just a hope. It's more than hope. Scientists don't hope that protons are real. They know that they're real because they can test for them. Those tests are falsifiable, and they're able to be duplicated by different people in different circumstances. This principle of duplication, that anyone who can conduct a scientific test following the right protocols will come to the same conclusion. You can validate other people's findings. That's where you really get away from faith as being the thing that you have to rest your own lack of understanding upon. I remember many years ago when my parents divorced, and this is a little bit of an aside, but they both prayed about this decision, right? And they both prayed ostensibly to the same being, the same Father in heaven, but they both got very different answers. My dad's answer was, no, you guys need to stay married. My mom's answer was, no, you guys totally need to get divorced, right? And it was always, like weird. Like if it's coming from the same source, shouldn't it be the same answer? And there's examples of that all over the place. And so would there be a way that you could test this? No, you just have to take things on faith that, we don't really know exactly why they got different answers, but it doesn't mean that there isn't a single source that you can pray to that will give you consistent answers that's consistent all the way across the board. No matter what the answer is, it'll always confirm truth. Like I think, as an example, if you like ran a study where you get 10 Mormons, for example, to pray about where so-and-so should go to college, or where do they think he's going to go on his mission, or, things like that, you're going to get maybe 10 different answers. You're going to get different answers. And faith is the thing that allows you to keep believing even when the evidence suggests that the object of your belief isn't really what you think it is. So, if you did get different answers about where to go to college or where you're going on your mission, it wouldn't change. The next time you'd still pray about it, the same thing. When you're believing it and you're accepting it on faith, you're like, oh, well, God has his reasons why it didn't work out this time, but I'll just, have faith in God. So it's not exactly the same thing when you're talking about science. And I'm sure you already know all of this, but actually, I really just needed to mansplain something. So thanks, Kaylin, for letting me mansplain the difference between faith and trust in a really, really sloppy and awkward way.
Now, imagine if you can, and of course you can't, shrinking one of those protons down to a billionth of its normal size into a space so small that it would make a proton look enormous. Now pack into that tiny, tiny space about an ounce of matter. Excellent. You are ready to start a universe.
So this is JK in Los Angeles. Oh, he's talking about the idea that, how small a proton is, and then you take this even smaller portion of a proton and you put an ounce of matter or whatever it was into it. I remember my physics teacher in high school had a thing on his wall that talked about how atoms were 99.99999 and, it went forever. Percent empty space. And then he would always tell the same joke, which was, so that means if you're making out with a girl and her dad is mad at you or you get in trouble, you can say and be technically correct, hey, I never touched her, because of the idea that we're mostly empty space and nothing actually touched itself. It was some kind of absurd, nerdy science joke.
I'm assuming, of course, that you wish to build an inflationary universe. If you'd prefer instead to build a more old-fashioned, standard Big Bang universe, you'll need additional materials. Whether it has just lately popped into being like a good idea, or whether it has been there forever, quietly awaiting the right moment. Time doesn't exist. There is no past for it to emerge from. And so, from nothing, our universe begins.
This is Kaylin.
And I just wanted to jump in here because singularities are kind of endlessly fascinating to me. And I kind of just wanted to share like a mini tangent. So the term singularity can actually be applied to a few different events. Like there's the singularity where humans are expected to transcend our own biology, basically becoming AI. And this is closely related to the technological singularity, which futurists suggest will happen around like 2040. But I would argue we've actually already entered the start of that. So basically, this is when civilization changes so much that its rules and technologies will become completely incomprehensible to previous generations. So basically, it's like a point of no return kind of a thing. Like my favorite term for this was coined by this guy, Ken McLeod. He called it the rapture for nerds. And, like, obviously that's not what Bryson is talking about here, but it's kind of crazy interesting to think about and probably a discussion in and of itself. But anyway, so there's also a gravitational or a space-time singularity, which is probably what he's talking about here. And these actually have to do with black holes. And basically they're just this one-dimensional point in time and space where everything is infinite, and basically the laws of physics just stop working. Everything gets crazy stretched out or stringy and like will kind of either collapse in on itself or suddenly expand. And what the theory is that our universe might have been in one of these black hole singularity things. But as far as we know, we don't even have an event horizon, which is what usually surrounds a black hole. So the singularity that created our universe is often referred to as a naked singularity, which I think is where this guy is going with this. I might have jumped the gun. I'm gonna keep listening.
So this is JK in Los Angeles. This idea of conceiving of nothing, that the singularity or the beginning of the universe doesn't exist inside of space. It's everything that exists. To me now, that's just it feels like it lights up the same part of my brain as trying to conceive of death, like my personal death not existing. It feels almost identical to me, if not identical, to try and conceive of something before the universe or nothing before the universe, and then conceive of me not existing. They seem to equate in my brain, and I can't do either of them, of course.
That's an interesting self-observation, JK. I'm not sure if I'm really able to imagine what you're saying or not, but I think the way that I've tried to approach it is kind of like a Dr. Seuss, Horton Hears a Who type approach, where I kind of picture something like a glass of seltzer water that just has a ton of bubbles in it. And, you can watch each of those bubbles form and pop and move around. And I think of each of those little tiny bubbles as its own singularity, inside of which, in like rapid time as I'm watching it, an entire universe is forming with all its galaxies and stars and solar systems and planets, some of which can support life that's kind of like us. Others support life which is very different from us. Others have no life at all. And then the bubble pops and others form, yada, yada, yada. I don't think that universes are really forming inside the seltzer water, but the only way that I can really conceive of this stuff is by trying to step outside of it, I guess, and take the macro universe and make it a micro thing, something, I don't know, I can imagine that I'm outside of, even though I know that I'm not. That's my new eternal perspective, very different from my old eternal perspective. I don't know, somewhat different from my old eternal perspective. There are probably some similarities that might be kind of interesting to explore. Maybe I'll do that. So I don't know, take that for whatever it's worth.
In a single blinding pulse, a moment of glory much too swift and expansive for any form of words, the singularity assumes heavenly dimensions, space beyond conception.
The name of the game is
Support the Infants.
Gotcha. 4 cross. One more game.
Object? Sign up on Patreon. Do what you can to show the infants your undying appreciation and keep them motivated to continue creating the kind of podcasts you enjoy to enjoy. Because when that happens, we all win.
I win. Where? I can't. Here, diagonally. Pretty sneaky, sis.
Hey, want to listen to Infants on Thrones without these annoying little self-promoting, come on already and join us over on Patreon commercial thingies? Well, then come on over already and join us on Patreon, because for as little as $1 per episode, you can listen to commercial-free episodes, have access to special Patreon-only bonus content, and most importantly, bask in that warm, glowing feeling of knowing that you've helped support a podcast that entertains you and that you maybe actually kind of sort of enjoy. So come on, $1 per episode. You can swing that, right? Everybody's doing it.
When this moment happened is a matter of some debate. Cosmologists have long argued over whether the moment of creation was 10 billion years ago, or twice that, or something in between. The consensus seems to be heading for a figure of about 13.7 billion years, but these things are notoriously difficult to measure, as we shall see further on. All that can really be said is that at some indeterminate point in the very distant past, for reasons unknown, there came the moment known to science as T equals 0. We were on our way.
This is Drew from Orange County, California. What we've listened to so far raises 3 questions in my mind. Number 1 is the age-old, unanswerable question of why is there anything at all? Why is there something rather than nothing? And it's amazing to me that that's kind of the most essential question about existence, and yet scientists still don't have an answer to it. Why is it that there is any energy at all or any matter at all? Why is it that there's anything such as a proton or something smaller than a proton that, makes up the atomic elements? The other question that arose for me was, okay, so you've got this matter compacted into something smaller than a proton. What is it that made that, that single point decide to expand? Why was there a Big Bang? I've heard a Christian apologist say that God spoke and then the Big Bang happened. They cling to the biblical theory that you needed to have an agent to make the universe, to make the Big Bang happen. Another idea is, maybe matter, energy. Let me use a water analogy. You can have water, but it can be in 3 different states. It can be in solid form, it can be in liquid form, or it can be in gaseous form. So perhaps when it's in its maximally concentrated state, energy and matter can be very small, like when it's frozen. But perhaps, and when, an ice cube melts, it occupies an even greater area. And if you turn it into vapor, it occupies an even greater area. So perhaps, we're dealing, I don't know, man. I'm not a fucking physicist. It's just my guess. The third idea that popped into my mind was, I think the author Bryson is a little bit dated in what he's saying when he says, from nothing, a universe comes into existence or something like that. I actually went to the trouble of reading Lawrence Krauss's book named, it was called something like A Universe from Nothing, or A Universe Made Out of Nothing. And what he basically spends that entire book discussing is the fact that as far as scientists can tell, there is no such thing as nothing. There is no place in the universe where nothing exists. That even in the void of space where we, used to think it was just a vacuum, where we used to think there was nothing, there are still what he calls relativistic quantum fields. And if I was a physicist, I would understand what the hell that means, but the best I could gather from that, with my political science bachelor's degree and my law degree, was that basically even where we think there's nothing, even where we think there's emptiness, there's something in there, and it's energy. Maybe just a small amount of energy, but it's still there. And basically the bottom line was, Krauss was saying the universe wasn't created from nothing. I shouldn't say created. He didn't use the word created, but the universe didn't come from nothing. As far as we can tell, there's just this something, and we don't know why it exists, but as far as we can tell, everywhere that there is, the entire vastness of space in the universe, there is no place in that vastness of space of our universe where there is nothing. So the universe didn't come from nothing, it came from something. And that something is this energy, which scientists tell us cannot be created or destroyed, which makes it eternal. Again, why does this eternal energy exist in the first place? Who knows? Why did it decide to explode and expand? Who knows? But it's pretty mind-blowing. Last thing I wanted to share about this section is it's interesting to me how harmonious Hindu cosmology is with what Bryson has shared with us so far. According to Hindu cosmology, the universe undergoes an infinite number of births and deaths. It expands and contracts and expands and contracts, and it does this an infinite number of times. This is perfectly in harmony with the idea of there being a Big Bang and expansion. And according to Hindu cosmology, eventually the universe will once again contract, and then it will explode again. And so another question that Bryson doesn't discuss is, what was there before the singularity? Was the singularity preceded by another universe, another expansion, an expanded universe that then came and collapsed upon itself? And when it collapsed upon itself, it gained such an intense density that then caused it to explode once again. Anyway, that would be in line with Hindu cosmology, which personally I'm really impressed by, because I'm astounded at how these ancient Hindus came up with a theory that turns out to be closer to what much closer to what modern science tells us than the Western monotheistic religions.
There is, of course, a great deal we don't know, and much of what we think we know we haven't known or thought we've known for long. Even the notion of the Big Bang is quite a recent one. Penzias and Wilson's finding pushed our acquaintance with the visible universe to within half an inch of the sidewalk.
This is Drew from Orange County, California. One of the questions that arose in my mind as I was listening to this was, from a creationist perspective, why is the universe so fucking huge? Why is it millions of billions of light years across? If your whole goal is basically to create human beings, does the universe really need to be so big? I mean, I don't know. I can't understand. We've been here a long time and we still haven't found sentient life on any other planet. And it just, I don't know, it's kind of weird. It's like that reality TV show called Alone, where they drop off a bunch of survivalists several miles away from each other so they can't find each other, and just kind of, sit back and watch each of these people individually try to survive. Why, if God created people, why did he have to spread them out on planets so far apart? Is he scared we might find each other? Wouldn't it really kind of increase and help missionary work, like interplanetary missionary work, if, because Jesus died on our planet. So if God would have put, if you would have made a smaller universe so that there were some planets closer to us, we could send spaceships out to them and we could preach the gospel. We could send them Bibles and Book of Mormons. pearls of great price, so they could have the benefit of the interpretations of the Egyptian papyri that Joseph Smith interpreted, and then they could really figure out their place in the universe, and they could be converted to the true restored gospel. Anyway, it just seems really inefficient that God would make the universe just so fucking big.
Oh, Drew. Oh, Drew. Such a lack of imagination here. So why does the universe have to be so big? I'll tell you exactly why. Because it has to do with probability.
Mr. Owl, how many licks does it take to get to the Tootsie Roll center of a Tootsie Pop?
That's the answer. One word, probability. How many failed attempts does it take for a single universe to spawn a galaxy that contains a solar system with a planet in the Goldilocks zone, like Earth is, where conditions are relatively perfect for life to begin and to evolve? Is our Earth like a 1 in a million kind of thing? I mean, what are the odds? What is the probability that this planet would form with these conditions in the universe? How many of these are there? We don't know, but there's got to be room for all of those galaxies and solar systems and planets that didn't develop into this kind of planet that sustains life. Neil deGrasse Tyson talks a little bit about this Goldilocks zone in his new book, so I'm going to put an insert in here.
Those stars with more than about 10 times the mass of the sun achieve sufficient pressure and temperature in their cores to manufacture dozens of elements heavier than hydrogen, including those that compose planets and whatever life may thrive upon them. These elements would be stunningly useless were they to remain where they formed, but high-mass stars fortuitously explode, scattering their chemically enriched guts throughout the galaxy. After 9 billion years of such enrichment in an undistinguished part of the universe, the outskirts of the Virgo supercluster, in an undistinguished galaxy, the Milky Way, in an undistinguished region, the Orion Arm, an undistinguished star, the Sun, was born. The gas cloud from which the sun formed contained a sufficient supply of heavy elements to coalesce and spawn a complex inventory of orbiting objects that includes several rocky and gaseous planets, hundreds of thousands of asteroids, and billions of comets. Planet surfaces began to cool. The one we call Earth formed in a kind of Goldilocks zone around the sun, where oceans remain largely in liquid form. Had Earth been much closer to the sun, the oceans would have evaporated. Had Earth been much farther away, the oceans would have frozen. In either case, life as we know it would not have evolved.
And now let's take this a step further. So what if the main purpose of a universe is not only to create planets that are suitable for life, but what if that life really is intended to evolve through some kind of eternal progression that we're going through right now? But maybe there is an evolution towards a godlike existence, whatever that is. Not what Joseph Smith said it was, but maybe something that's beyond what we can really put our heads around right now. I remember hearing Richard Dawkins talk about something like this as a possibility in a roundabout way, in a very aggravating conversation with Ben Stein, a movie Ben Stein did about intelligent design. He said that if there is a God, he would have had to evolve that way.
Well, then who did create the heavens and the earth?
Why do you use the word who? You see, you immediately beg the question by using the word who.
Well, then how did it get created?
Well, by a very slow process.
Well, how did it start?
Nobody knows how it started. We know the kind of event that it must have been. We know the sort of event that must have happened for the origin of life.
And what was that?
It was the origin of the first self-replicating molecule.
Right, and how did that happen?
I told you we don't know.
So you have no idea how it started?
No, nor has anybody.
Nor has anyone else. What do you think is the possibility that intelligent design might turn out to be the answer to some issues in genetics or in evolution?
It could come about in the following way. It could be that at some earlier time, somewhere in the universe, a civilization evolved by probably some kind of Darwinian means to a very, very high level of technology. and designed a form of life that they seeded onto perhaps this planet. Now, that is a possibility and an intriguing possibility. And I suppose it's possible that you might find evidence for that if you look at the details of biochemistry, molecular biology. You might find a signature of some sort of designer.
Wait a second. Richard Dawkins thought intelligent design might be a legitimate pursuit?
And that designer could well be a higher intelligence from elsewhere in the universe. But that higher intelligence would itself have had to have come about by some explicable or ultimately explicable process. It couldn't have just jumped into existence spontaneously. That's the point.
So Professor Dawkins was not against intelligent design, just certain types of designers, such as God.
Oh, Ben Stein is so smug. He's so smug in that interview. But it's, look, here's the thing. Anything that where you say God, this is the creation of man. We don't know what would be out there. Nobody does. And if somebody comes and tells you that they know all this stuff, come on. There's no evidence for it. Does that mean that it's impossible? No, it doesn't mean that it's impossible. So you got Richard Dawkins saying, yeah, there's a possibility, but this is how it would have had to have happened, and it's improbable. He's giving that suggestion, but that's not what Ben Stein wants to hear and deliver to his audience. Anyway, Ben fucking Stein.
Bueller.
He's sick.
So, Drew, why is the universe so big? You think it's inefficient? Well, it's necessary. It is just as big as it has to be, or at least it's just as big as it is in order to fulfill its purpose, which I'm going to say is so that life could exist and evolve to a point where one day a podcast called Infants on Thrones could reach your ears. That is the purpose of all of it. And Andrew, that you could be part of it too, as you have been. So congratulations, you have fulfilled the purpose of life. You can go on to other things now. I don't know what that is. That's not a threat. It's not a threat.
Incidentally, disturbance from cosmic background radiation is something we have all experienced. Tune your television to any channel it doesn't receive, and about 1% of the dancing static you see is accounted for by this ancient remnant of the Big Bang. The next time you complain that there is nothing on, remember that you can always watch the birth of the universe. One notion is that perhaps the singularity was the relic of an earlier, collapsed universe, that we're just one of an eternal cycle of expanding and collapsing universes, like the bladder on an oxygen machine.
This is Drew from Orange County, California. What the author just said there is in perfect harmony with Hindu cosmology. And that kind of blows my mind because this is something that the Hindu philosophers came up with about 2,500 years ago. And they theorized this same thing, that the universe, which they called Brahman, which it's their name for God because they believe God is the universe is God. But Brahman comes from the root word bur, which means to expand. So Brahman means something like expanse. So their name for God is expanse. Their name for the universe is expanse. But their theory is that the universe, Brahman, goes through an infinite number of expansions and contractions. And that is in perfect harmony with what Bryson just said, that one of these theories is it's hard to explain the singularity, what happened before the singularity. Why did the universe expand in the first place? It might help explain why the singularity happened if you also postulate that previous to the singularity there was a universe, an expanded universe, and then it contracted and collapsed upon itself, and then it just expanded again. That is Hindu Cosmology 101.
Others attribute the Big Bang to what they call a false vacuum, or a scalar field, or vacuum energy. Some quality or thing, at any rate, that introduced a measure of instability into the nothingness that was. It seems impossible that you could get something from nothing, but the fact that once there was nothing and now there is a universe is evident proof that you can.
So this is JK in Los Angeles. There's the idea, I think, brought up that, maybe the Big Bang didn't just happen one time. Maybe it's been happening, and I think he used the word eternal cycle, like it's collapsing and reigniting and expanding eternally, and it's going on and on. That reminds, I mean, obviously, eternal cycle is a very Mormon-sounding phrase, and not super related, but it reminds me of when I was in high school. I thought I was one of those people that was, very interested in what I think you guys call the deep doctrine, and this idea that that there are puzzles almost to solve. And I remember feeling so clever and talking to my girlfriend at the time about this idea that God has created worlds without number, or by his hands, worlds without number are made. And I thought, oh, what if that means that he's still creating them? That could be the reason that they don't have number. Like, you can't count them because there's still new ones all the time. And I was very proud of myself for coming up with that idea.
It may be that our universe is merely part of many larger universes, some in different dimensions, and that big bangs are going on all the time, all over the place. Or it may be that space and time had some other forms altogether before the Big Bang, forms too alien for us to imagine.
This is Kaylin.
Okay, so I'm at minute 1042, and just this last part kind of made me think about discussions I used to have with my ex-husband about the beginnings of the universe. Pillow talk. And he was a super TBM, and he would tell me that the universe is made up of intelligences, that every living thing, including like God and Christ and even us, were all once intelligences in the vastness of space. And he believed that the intelligences basically guided the entire universe, including like the Big Bang. But the intelligences are so pure that we couldn't possibly understand their existence prior to the creation of the universe. Which I guess I can't argue against, because even science isn't 100% sure about all this. But it's just one of those things where it's kind of like, that's basically what religion does, is, we have these gaps, and so we fill it with some, post hoc explanation relying on, magic, essentially.
Hey, Kaylin. Now, not to defend your TBM ex-husband or anything, but I keep thinking about this whole intelligences thing too, so I'm really glad you brought it up. So let's pause for a moment and remind ourselves what Joseph Smith said about intelligences. So I'm going to go to, the Encyclopedia of Mormonism. This is EOM, Encyclopedia of Mormonism.byu.edu. It's intelligences. The author is Paul Nolan Hyde. Does anybody know Paul Nolan? That's a cool name, Nolan. All right. The word intelligences, which is plural, occurs frequently in LDS literature, having reference to the period of the premortal existence of mankind. Premortal, before we came to Earth, which is whatever. The term has received two interpretations by writers within the church. One as the literal spirit children of heavenly parents, and then the second one as individual entities existing prior to their spirit birth. Because the Latter-day Revelation has not clarified the meaning of the term, I wonder why, because a more precise interpretation is not possible at present. The scriptural source for the word intelligences is the Book of Abraham, chapter 3, verses 21 to 22. I'm going to click on that and read it. What did it say? 3:21 to 22. I'm going to start with 20. The Lord thy God sent his angel to deliver thee from the hands of the priest Elkanah, the made-up priest Elkanah. I dwell in the midst of them all. I now therefore have come down unto thee to declare unto thee the works which my hands have made, wherein my wisdom excelleth them all. For I the ruler, for I rule in the heavens above and in the earth beneath, in all wisdom and prudence over all the intelligences thine eyes have seen from the beginning. So that's it? It's over all the intelligences thine eyes have seen from the beginning. I came down in the beginning, in the midst of all the intelligences thou hast seen. Okay, now the Lord had shown unto me, Abraham, the intelligences that were organized before the world was, and among all these there were many of the noble and great ones. Maybe
maybe Joseph just had a really hard time interpreting, translating, literally translating whatever the word was that he was seeing on the papyri that came out to be intelligences. It was actually like Curulome or something like that. I don't know. But, okay, so basically this idea of intelligence is, he also talked about it in the King Follett Discourse, from which we take the podcast name, Infants on Thrones. And in King Follett, he talked about that there were all of these intelligences, and one was far greater than the rest, and it was God, and he saw all of the other intelligences and was like, hey, I'm going to help the other ones get to where I am, and so created this whole plan. Okay, so that's basically the Mormon teachings, or the Joseph Smith teachings that, have been interpreted in a couple of different ways, as this article said. So, here's what I've been thinking about intelligences. They're talking about material that is eternal. Oh, there's another scripture in here that where is it? That I'm not going to go back to it, but that matter cannot be created or destroyed. It just always is, and that's kind of what the intelligences are. So that's pretty consistent, actually, with what science is telling us about the nature of the universe, at least at the atomic level, that protons, neutrons, quarks, all of these things are eternal in nature. They're not destroyed, they're not created, which I don't quite understand how that works with the whole Big Bang thing, but, I'm still trying to wrap my heads around this too. My heads. So this is actually kind of a cool thought, every single one of us is made up of eternal material, right? I mean, Neil deGrasse Tyson said so, not just Joseph Smith. Their sources of this were very different, but that we actually are made up of eternal material. And when we die, that's not the end of the eternal material that we're made up of. It gets repurposed into, other things. But there is kind of like resurrection in the sense that there is life after, probably, I don't know, in some form or whatever, even when the sun explodes and the planet explodes and all of our cosmic star dust floats in the universe and then, I don't know, becomes something else. Is that how it works? I don't know. But as far as the intelligences go, I don't think it's that crazy. It's actually one of my favorite teachings of Mormonism, and pretty consistent with science, that we are made up of stuff that existed before and is it going to exist after and is eternal in nature. The question is there actual intelligence or consciousness or something like that in these intelligences? And that's where Joseph Smith said, oh yes, of course there is, because I read it on the papyrus, or God told me, or whatever. Maybe there is something that he was tapping into. If we're made up of all of these things and there is some kind of memory or consciousness or intelligence at a microscopic quark level, maybe part of our intuition is just that. It comes from that. We know things because these pieces that are a part of us used to be parts of other things going back forever in the history of the universe, and so we do kind of know things, and some people are a little more sensitive to that than others and can make guesses that are right. I don't know. I feel stupid even saying this, but these are the kinds of things that bounce around in my head, and I really need to sit and try and put my thoughts down so I can articulate them better. Maybe I'll do that for the end of this episode, but right now I need to stop rambling because I've been doing a lot of rambling here.
It seems impossible that you could get something from nothing, but the fact that once there was nothing and now there is a universe is evident proof that you can. It may be that our universe is merely part of many larger universes, some in different dimensions, and that big bangs are going on all the time, all over the place. Or it may be that space and time had some other forms altogether before the Big Bang, forms too alien for us to imagine, and that the Big Bang represents some sort of transition phase, where the universe went from a form we can't understand to one we almost can. These are very close to religious questions. Dr. Andre Lind, a cosmologist at Stanford, told the New York Times in 2001.
So this is J.K. In Los Angeles. Someone makes a comment about these are almost religious questions. And that just reminds me of that phrase, never discuss religion and politics. These are like the two things that you can't discuss with people unless you can completely agree with them, as it seems to be for a lot of people. And I wonder if that's because politics and religion, or what a lot of atheists now will say, what's your metaphysics? I think I've heard that on your podcast. Maybe these are our core concepts of reality, like how things really are. And so to have someone challenge the way that we think life is related to politics and what should be done about governing a population, and then also the way that we think the universe is, or existence. I don't know. Maybe that's the link between those two things.
Yeah, I totally agree with you, J.K. Religion has been the way that people have explored these kinds of questions and come up with answers for them for thousands and thousands of years. And the answers that religion brings have become so crucial and core to people's identity at an individual level, and also social identities, how we exist in groups. It forms the basis of our worldview. It's just so important. So when you have someone come in and say something like, scientifically, such and such has been proven to be wrong or impossible or improbable or whatever, that's definitely a threat that challenges the status quo and could potentially undermine the whole enchilada, not only on an individual level, but also at a group level. And any threats to stability must be eradicated, right? And, like the old saying goes, don't touch my enchilada.
Don't touch my enchilada.
You don't want people messing around with your worldview or telling you that you're wrong or that your whole group is wrong and that the reasons you're here are wrong. It's just, no, don't touch my enchilada. So what happens when that happens? When we feel threatened, we attack, because that's what we've evolved to do. It's survival of the fittest, right? Not only individual versus individual competition, but also group versus group competition. It's how we've evolved. But it's not how truth exists. The evolution of the human brain and our ability to perceive things is one thing, but the truth of the universe, that's out there, and that's real, and that's immutable and unchangeable, but we can't really grasp it, whether we're using religion as the tool to try and understand it, or science as a tool to try and understand it. We're really limited in what we're able to perceive and understand with this 3 pounds of gray matter that we have in our heads. On a cosmic level, that compared to the whole universe, I don't know. There's so much, I think, that is out there that we just cannot perceive and even think to perceive of. But so anyway, yeah, I agree with you. I think that this is one of the reasons why you really can't separate science from religion on a personal, instinctual, emotional level. The way that personal and group identity is understood and accepted. And it all comes back to that well-known saying.
Don't touch my enchilada.
Right. Now, you live in L.A.
The Big Bang Theory isn't about the bang itself, but about what happened after the bang. Not long after, mind you. By doing a lot of math and watching carefully what goes on in particle accelerators, scientists believe they can look back to 10 to the power of minus 43 seconds after the moment of creation, when the universe was still so small that you would have needed a microscope to find it. We mustn't swoon over every extraordinary number that comes before us, but it is perhaps worth latching on to one from time to time, just to be reminded of their ungraspable and amazing breadth. Thus, 10 to the power of minus 43 is 0.00042 zeros 1, or 1 10,000,000,000,000,000 trillionths of a second.
Hello, ladies. Look at your man. Now back to me. Now back at your man. Now back to me. Sadly, he isn't me. But if he stopped using lady-scented body wash and
became a Patreon subscriber of Infants on Thrones,
he could smell like he's me. Look down. Back up. Where are you? You're on a boat with the man your man could smell like. What's in your hand? Back at me. I have it. It's an oyster with 2 tickets to that thing you love. Look again. The tickets are now diamond. Anything is possible when your man
becomes a Patreon subscriber of Infants on Thrones.
I'm on a horse.
Hey, Want to listen to Infants on Thrones without these annoying little self-promoting, come on already and join us over on Patreon commercial thingies? Well, then come on over already and join us on Patreon, because for as little as $1 per episode, you can listen to commercial-free episodes, have access to special Patreon-only bonus content, and most importantly, bask in that warm, glowing feeling of knowing that you've helped support a podcast that entertains you and that you maybe actually kind of sort of enjoy. So come on, $1 per episode. You can swing that, right? Everybody's doing it.
A word on scientific notation. Since very large numbers are cumbersome to write and nearly impossible to read, scientists use a shorthand involving powers, or multiples of 10, in which, for instance, 10 billion is written 10 to the power of 10, and 6,500,000 becomes 6.5 times 10 to the power of 6. The principle is based very simply on multiples of 10. 10 times 10, or 100, becomes 10 to the power of 2. 10 times 10 times 10, or 1,000, is 10 to the power of 3. And so on, obviously and indefinitely. Negative notations provide essentially a mirror image, with the superscript number indicating the number of spaces to the right of the decimal point. So 10 to the power of minus 4 means 0.0001. Though I salute the principle, it remains an amazement to me that anyone seeing 1.4 times 10 to the power of 9 kilometers to the power of 3 would see at once that that signifies 1.4 billion cubic kilometers. And no less a wonder that they would choose the former over the latter in print, especially in a book designed for the general reader where the example was found. On the assumption that many general readers are as unmathematical as I am, I will use them sparingly, though they are occasionally unavoidable, not least in a chapter dealing with things on a cosmic scale.
This is Drew from Orange County, California. So I am so bad at math, I can't even wrap my mind around the math that he's talking about here. It just makes my head hurt. But one thing that it makes me think about is that it's amazing to me that this sort of universal language of humankind when it comes to understanding the universe and our place in it is mathematics. Whether you speak Chinese or Hindi or Arabic or English or Spanish or whatever, there is a universal language that everybody on every continent can use. And that language is the one that is used to try to decipher and understand and figure out the universe. It just makes me think that perhaps in the science-based religion of the future, the scriptures are going to be written in math.
And yea, verily, it came to pass that L plus I to the FE equals 0. And thus it is for all manner of zeroites.
Most of what we know, or believe we know, about the early moments of the universe is thanks to an idea called inflation theory, first propounded in 1979 by a junior particle physicist, then at Stanford, now at MIT, named Alan Guth. Without it, there would be no clumps of matter, and thus no stars, just drifting gas and everlasting darkness.
This is Kaylin.
This is interesting to me because I actually read something about this back in January. Apparently, inflation theory explains the sudden expansion of the universe from the Big Bang. And I think scientists previously theorized that it explained why the universe seems to continue to expand. But then they realized that the rate of acceleration was off from what it would be if it continued to expand from the time of the Big Bang. So basically, they crunched the numbers and decided that the inflation event from the Big Bang had ended forever ago. But there's this guy who came out with a new theory that said that the continued expansion has to do with something called dark energy. And basically what this guy was doing is that he was measuring the amounts of dark matter in the universe and kind of formulated this theory that said that there was probably a second inflammation period, which explains why the universe appears to still be expanding. Although I think the fact that the universe is expanding is kind of still up for debate, I guess. That's kind of what I saw when I did some research into this.
According to Guth's theory, at 1/10,000,000th of a trillionth of a trillionth of a trillionth of a second, gravity emerged. After another ludicrously brief interval, it was joined by electromagnetism and the strong and weak nuclear forces, the stuff of physics. This is one reason that some experts believe there may have been many other Big Bangs, perhaps trillions and trillions of them, spread through the mighty span of eternity, and that the reason we exist in this particular one is that this is one we could exist in. As Edward P. Tryon of Columbia University once put it, in answer to the question of why it happened, I offer the modest proposal that our universe is simply one of those things which happen from time to time. To which adds Guth, although the creation of a universe might be very unlikely, Tryon emphasized that no one had counted the failed attempts.
This is Drew from Orange County, California. Wow, mind blown. This idea that, perhaps there were, hundreds, thousands, millions of previous universes before us, and they didn't have anything resembling human life. Perhaps conditions just turned out to be to make human life possible this time around. If this is a hard idea if you come from the Western monotheistic point of view, because, again, why is God so inefficient in his method of creation? It fits perfectly with the Hindu idea that the universe, which is God, which is this eternal, self-existing thing, goes through an infinite number of births and deaths, of expansions and contractions. But the other question this raises is, I mentioned earlier this question of this eternal, unanswerable question of why is there something at all instead of nothing? And after that, the next question becomes, why does the something that there is, the universe, matter, energy, etc., we see that it operates according to certain laws of physics. And the next question is, why does it operate according to those laws? Why is there order? The ancient Greeks called this logos, that there is this sort of natural order, this sort of natural law. Why is there natural law? According to the theory that Bryson just said, perhaps in previous universes, the conditions, maybe gravity was off a bit, the conditions were not possible for human life. Why would the logos be different? Why would the natural law, the laws of physics, why would they be different in previous universes than they are in our universe? I have no idea. But it's just, it's just another unanswerable question of why does the speed of light, why does light travel at the speed it travels? Why doesn't it travel faster? Why doesn't it travel slower? There's no apparent answer to these questions. Why is the strength of gravity what it is? Why isn't it stronger? Why isn't it weaker? There's this order, there's this law. The Greeks called it logos. And, of course, that's why the Western monotheists think that there's a God who made everything be that way, but, doesn't necessarily have to be that way.
All right, I really like your questions here, Drew. I like your approach to this. I think that calling these things laws that the universe follows kind of begs the question. Like Dawkins said to Ben Stein, it kind of begs the question: who created the law? As if there was a creator, while also maybe suggesting that the universe has a choice whether it follows or violates these laws. So maybe we're personifying the universe a little bit too much, which I would understand why we would do that. But my sense is that these laws are, basically the result of just the way that things happened. And this is going to be a very flawed example here. But if you take a handful, let's say you've got 10 dice, and you put them in your hand and you roll them on the floor, and then once they stop spinning and bouncing around and they finally come to rest, you count up a total of 55 points. And so now that configuration, 55 points, becomes the universal law or standard by which all of the other elements have to conform to in some way or another. So that becomes the constant. I sound really weird right now. That matter is organized or created or whatever it is. But then if you do it again, you pick up the dice and you roll them again. Maybe this time you get 32. And then 32 becomes the new standard for that roll. And then you pick it up, you do it again and over. And each time you do it, you get different results. And sometimes it's the same, but it's usually a different result. especially if you change the number of dice that you're holding. Maybe you roll 12 this time. Maybe you roll 5. So I don't know. In this very flawed thought experiment, rolling the dice is essentially equivalent to the Big Bang creation of a universe from a singularity. And the number that you get after the roll of these dice are all of the multiple variables that I don't even know enough about to really talk about that happen in the Big Bang. Variables like the speed at which a universe expands, or the temperature fluctuations that happen within the expansion, or maybe the number of heavy elements that are emitted from the singularity, or things like that. Who knows? And so humans living on this planet Earth is one of millions of potentially infinite possible outcomes of the universe coming into being, rolling the dice. But not all universes have the same laws that this universe has. And, the reason that we are the way that we are is because it's based on a roll of 55 or whatever. Who knows? But the reason I even had this thought or idea was it was something that Neil deGrasse Tyson said in his new book, which is called Astrophysics for People in a Hurry, where he talks about this slight imbalance for reasons that they don't know. It's this slight imbalance. It just happened to come into being where antimatter and matter don't completely balance themselves off. There's like a little bit of difference between the two of them, and the significance of that difference has had a huge impact on the rest of the universe. So I'm going to play this clip from Neil deGrasse Tyson.
Strong theoretical evidence suggests that an episode in the very early universe, perhaps during one of the force splits, endowed the universe with a remarkable asymmetry in which particles of matter barely outnumbered particles of antimatter by about 1,000,000,001 to 1,000,000,000. Without the 1,000,000,001 to 1,000,000,000 imbalance between matter and antimatter, all mass in the universe would have self-annihilated, leaving a cosmos made of photons and nothing else. The ultimate let there be light scenario.
Martin Rees, Britain's astronomer royal, believes that there are many universes, possibly an infinite number, each with different attributes in different combinations, and that we simply live in one that combines things in the way that allows us to exist. He makes an analogy with a very large clothing store. If there is a large stock of clothing, you're not surprised to find a suit that fits. If there are many universes, each governed by a different set of numbers, there will be one where there is a particular set of numbers suitable to life. We are in that one. Rees maintains that 6 numbers in particular govern our universe, and that if any of these values were changed, even very slightly, things could not be as they are. For example, for the universe to exist as it does requires that hydrogen be converted to helium in a precise but comparatively stately manner, specifically in a way that converts 7/1000ths of its mass to energy. Lower that value very slightly from 0.007% to 0.006%, say, and no transformation could take place. The universe would consist of hydrogen and nothing else. Raise the value very slightly to 0.008%, and bonding would be so wildly prolific that the hydrogen would long since have been exhausted. In either case, with the slightest tweaking of the numbers, the universe as we know and need it would not be here.
This is Drew from Orange County, California. These facts that Bryson has just talked about, the fact that if, some of these laws of physics were off just a smidge, human life would not be possible. Now, this is the heart and soul of the intelligent design argument. I read a book several years ago called Privileged Planet. It was by a couple authors who believed in intelligent design. I read it as when I was still a TBM. And I mean, this was basically the entire book. It's actually a really cool book. Even if you're not a believer in, Mormonism or creationism, it's still worth reading just because it goes through, example after example after example of these laws of physics that they were off. If they were off just a smidge, human life wouldn't be possible. Now, the big counter argument I see to the intelligent design argument is that if you're going to believe that there's an intelligence, a creator behind it, you have to believe he's kind of it's kind of an oxymoron to say intelligent design, because in so many ways it seems that the intelligent designer is unintelligent, because Well, just think of the gross inefficiency. Why do we have this enormous universe and we still haven't found life elsewhere? So, why do human beings seem to be an anomaly in the universe rather than something more common? Other things like, why do we have a tailbone? Why is there a spot in our eye that is blind? Why do we swallow and breathe through the same hole? There's a lot of counter arguments to the intelligent design argument, but anyway, these little figures he's been reading off here, it just remind me of the intelligent design argument.
I should say that everything is just right so far. In the long term, gravity may turn out to be a little too strong, and one day it may halt the expansion of the universe and bring it collapsing in upon itself till it crushes itself down into another singularity, possibly to start the whole process over again. For the record, these three possible universes are known respectively as closed, open, and flat.
Once again, Kaylin.
I kind of got into thinking about how the universe is expected to end, which I guess we're getting a little bit ahead of ourselves since he's only just talked about how it's supposed to start. But obviously the ending is definitely going to be closely related to how it started, just because of how things seem to work out. But apparently there are like 3 theories of how the universe is supposed to end. Bryson just covered the Big Crunch, which is where the universe's expansion reverses and suddenly everything implodes on itself. And he also mentioned the Big Freeze, which is this theory where basically we'd get to a point where all mechanical motion in the universe will just stop and freeze up. But there's also a third theory called the Big Rip, where the universe will continue to expand until everything just kind of tears itself apart. But according to an article I read in Wired, it's actually the Big Freeze that is, for some reason, the most likely scenario. I guess the idea now is that the Big Crunch isn't likely because of the role that dark energy plays in the expansion of the universe. So, yeah, I guess that's weirdly comforting. I don't know. Just saying.
Now, the question that has occurred to all of us at some point is, what would happen if you travelled out to the edge of the universe and, as it were, put your head through the curtains? Where would your head be if it were no longer in the universe? What would you find beyond?
This is Drew from Orange County, California. Where would you be if you were able to stick your head through the curtains outside the universe? Well, unfortunately for Bryson, it sounds like he hasn't been to the Mormon temple. I've been to the Mormon temple, so I know the answer to this question. The answer is you would be through the veil. And what that would look like is it would be a big room, white carpet, white drapery, white couches, probably be a fancy-looking chandelier. And there'd be a bunch of people standing around. They wouldn't really look happy, but they wouldn't really look sad. They'd kind of look bored. They'd all be wearing white robes and green aprons. The dudes would have these funny white graduation caps on. The women would be wearing veils. And, there'd be some, nice elderly lady telling people to move along and not spend so much time there.
The answer, disappointingly, is that you could never get to the edge of the universe.
Well, you could with a temple recommend, right, Drew?
That's not because it would take too long to get there, though of course it would, but because even if you travelled outward and outward in a straight line, indefinitely and pugnaciously, you would never arrive at an outer boundary. Instead, you would come back to where you began, at which point, presumably, you would rather lose heart in the exercise and give up. It is all something of a challenge to intuition, or as the biologist J.B.S. Haldane once famously observed, the universe is not only queerer than we suppose, it is queerer than we can suppose.
So this is J.K. In Los Angeles. It's queerer than we can suppose. It kind of reminds me of this, seems like a fad or a trend now of people really being interested in science. And I remember seeing this comic on the internet a while ago where, maybe they're laying back in the park looking up at the sky, and one of them says, "Oh, I really, really like science." And the other one says, "Well, do you mean that you like, taking rigorous measurements and repeating experiments and, doing all the drudgery work of science? And, having people tear down your ideas, or do you just like pretty pictures of space?" And the other person goes, "Oh, I guess I just like pretty pictures of space." That kind of reminds me of, so this idea of entertainment of science, that science can be kind of told or talked about in an entertaining way. Like I'm thinking of Morgan Freeman's TV show Through the Wormhole. We can watch the show. It's an hour long and it's very entertaining because it brings these big concepts into like analogies that we can understand. And it sort of seems to tickle the same part of your brain that I remember being a Mormon when they would bring up, you know, the deeper doctrine. Maybe it's going back to that puzzle solving idea where we get some kind of an endorphin release from, you know, and that's why this person in the Bible is the one that had to come back as this angel, or that's a bad example, but these ideas, I remember on my mission we would call them kolob, and my companion he wanted to hear all the things that I learned in my BYU Book of Mormon class about, you know, where like, oh, the spirit world is here on earth, and here's the quote from the general authority that said it. And he loved that stuff, and I loved that stuff, you know. And he would be like, "Okay, you know, Elder Ramsey, like, let's hear some kolob. What do you have for me today?"
The analogy that is usually given for explaining the curvature of space is to try to imagine someone from a universe of flat surfaces who had never seen a sphere being brought to Earth. No matter how far he roamed across the planet's surface, he would never find an edge. He might eventually return to the spot where he had started, and would of course be utterly confounded to explain how that had happened. And here's the troubling point. To forge these heavy elements, you need the kind of heat and energy of a Big Bang. Yet there has been only one Big Bang, and it didn't produce them. So where did they come from? Interestingly, the man who found the answer to that question was a cosmologist who heartily despised the Big Bang as a theory and coined the term Big Bang sarcastically, as a way of mocking it. We'll get to him shortly, but before we turn to the question of how we got here, it might be worth taking a few minutes to consider just where exactly here is.
And this is where Bryson ends his first chapter on the universe, but it's not where our speculation on it ends.
This is Drew from Orange County, California. I just got to say what he ended with, that whole thing about if you were to try to travel out in a straight line towards the edge of the universe, you would never reach it because of the curvature of space and time. I just gotta say, what kind of Alice in Wonderland LSD acid trip is that shit? Like, that is fucking crazy. I'm gonna have to take some LSD so I can figure that out. You know, the point that just raises for me is that it really shows to me that, you know, even if you take a scientific worldview, there's a huge element of faith.
I felt a great disturbance in the force.
That you've got to take. You still believe in mysteries. You still believe in these unsolvable mysteries. You still have to exercise faith in these prophets called scientists. Like I said, as someone with a political science background and a law degree background, I am so unequipped to be able to intelligently evaluate for myself whether or not these physicists know what they're talking about. And so I necessarily have to exercise some faith in them. And I'm not trying to draw an equivalency argument between religious leaders and, you know, prophets and scientists. I do believe in empiricism. I do believe it's a more reliable way of figuring stuff out than revelation. But even still, we are left with this problem that we have to exercise faith in these people who have this expertise that we do not possess, who sometimes speak a language that we do not speak. I do not speak the math that these guys speak. And so I necessarily have to exercise faith in them. So, yeah, I guess Daniel Peterson and all of those other assholes are right.
Well, we do have at least one of our contributors who does speak that language of math, Drew. So this is Sterling. We haven't heard from him yet, but Sterling's a physicist, and he's got some things to say.
In this recording, it was talked about that there's a lot of fine-tuning in this universe for the creation of life. Yeah, that is the case. There's a lot of numbers that have to be right on for life to exist, and one of my favorites is the triple alpha process that happens in stars. This is the process that needs to happen in stars to convert or to make carbon. Anyway, it was found out. This is the tricky part. So here I am as a physicist. I love to go into all the details, but I also know that I'll bore people to death if I go into all the details. I don't know where the edge is of the people I'm talking to. But the point is here is 2 helium nuclei have to fuse to form beryllium-8. Beryllium-8 is highly, highly unstable. Because it's highly, highly unstable, if you look at the model of beryllium-8 fusing in stars, you end up with a universe with hardly any carbon at all. In other words, life does not exist. Well, this was a problem that was known about back in the 1950s or so. I'm not sure exactly when, but Fred Hoyle saw this story. He knew there's carbon in the universe. He knew about this problem. So those were the constraints, and the solution he came up with is, well, if carbon-12 has this exact resonance at this really narrow band, then that's the solution we need to have enough carbon in the universe. Well, several years later, in a lab, this resonance was found, and this resonance was at the exact, really close to the energy that this Robert Hoyle predicted. So here we have a situation where we didn't know the answer, but because we could see the constraints, an answer was proposed, and that answer was later vindicated by nature. Amazing thing, but again, same idea here with the amazing universe. This magical resonance in carbon-12 is essential for carbon existing in this universe, which is needed for life to be created. Hence, if this resonance didn't exist, you wouldn't exist. I hope that makes you feel good.
Yeah, gee, thanks, Sterling. That makes us feel great. So why don't you tell us about what it was like being a physicist at BYU? See how I just set it up like that? It's because he recorded. I knew that he was going to say, I mean, it's just all tricks.
So I thought I'd give a little story about Mormon physicist thinking. I was a physics major at BYU, and the first physics class I took for physics major was taught by Ross Spencer. The very first thing he talked about was this. He's saying, well, you're all training to be physicists in this class. I just want to let you know how your life's most likely going to go. You're going to be in a Sunday school class not too far in the future. They're going to be talking about the light of Christ. They're going to be talking about the light of God, and in this class they'll look to you because you're a physicist and you'll know a lot about light, and they'll ask you, so what does the light of Christ have to do with the light in the universe and the lights in the heavens? And you'll pause, and after a little while you'll say, well, it has absolutely nothing to do with each other. At that point, you'll end up in the scout program for the next 20 years. That's what happens to Mormon physicists.
Thanks, Sterling. Hey, do you have any physicist jokes or anything, for the philosophies of man mingled with humor?
Physics is like sex. Sure, it gives some practical results, but that's not why we do it.
Okay.
So for your sci-fi thought experiment, I want to shortchange this.
So let me give you a little bit of background with what he's talking about here. So I don't know, several years ago, I saw some video in a class I was in about, I think it's called Fermi. It's a particle accelerator in Switzerland, something like that, where they're smashing molecules at a subatomic level. And I had this idea of what if there was some kind of a machine like that where they were actually able to observe a big bang and the formation of a universe, and there's a little universe that forms inside of this big particle accelerator, so we're getting into the science fiction piece of it. And then, I was still Mormon at the time, and I was thinking, and then the scientists could be like, oh, well, we want to experience what life would be like on one of the planets inside of the universe, and they find a way that they're able to like beam inside the machine onto the planet, and that, you know, something goes wrong. Yeah, I was trying to make it like the scientists in the lab were like the pre-existence, you know, like the war in heaven kind of thing, and like the guy that goes in first is Jesus, and then like Lucifer goes in, like a Lucifer guy goes in to try and like submarine Jesus, or maybe it's it was that that two scientists go in that are like Adam and Eve, and they're going to populate the planet. That was it. And then the rival guy goes in, and he's Satan, and then like another scientist goes in, and he's Jesus, and you know, he's able to get them all back and save them, but he has to die in the process. I'm sorry. So anyway, I posed this kind of question to the contributors for the SHONE project and said, here's a scientific thing. If there was something like this and you were able to create a universe, what would you expect to see, or what would you expect to do with it? You know, I didn't tell them all the stuff that I had planned when I thought about that years ago. But so that's what Sterling's referring to here. So let's hear how he's going to shortchange that idea.
You create a simulation. If you go into that simulation, how do you know you're in a simulation? It's the philosophy question of a brain in a jar. If you're just a brain in a jar being stimulated by the outside, how do you know if you're a brain in the jar? Well, the question arises, are we in a simulation? Is there any way we can detect if we're in a simulation? One possible solution is calculating pi out digits forever, because if we're in a simulation, then that number has to be stored in the simulation. And if we're in a simulation, then all these rules we have aren't actual rules. They're just cold hard logic. Anyway, if you calculate pi out far enough and you start seeing something repeating, that might give you a sign that we're in a simulation.
That is way too smart for me to know what to do with. Wow. That was cool, Sterling.
And that's, if you've ever heard of the Fermi paradox, you can look that up if you want to. But that's a proposed solution to the Fermi paradox of where are all the aliens.
Do you believe in aliens?
What do you mean, aliens?
You know, I don't know where all the aliens are, Sterling, but I do know that we've got more audio from you. Now, the quality of this audio is not very good. There's kind of a reverb echo effect with it that just came with it. So bear with the bad audio quality. It's worth it because what Sterling has to say here is really, really fascinating.
So I'm a physicist. I worked at a particle accelerator for 6 years. I love this stuff. I have since I was 10 years old. The biggest idea while listening to this that I had is where do you get your constraints from? So, quote by Mark Rosewater, restrictions breed creativity. I have a book entitled The Whack on the Side of the Head, and one of the tools it talks about as far as being creative is to add a constraint. So if you have a writing assignment and you have no constraints on that writing assignment, you can write anything you want. It won't probably be very good. It'll be hard to write. But if you add lots and lots and lots of constraints on what you can write, a lot of times that's where you get your most creative writing from. And it's also like that with anything that we write about or any story that we make is what are the constraints that we put into this story? So the Big Bang is a story. It's something we conjure up, the size of atoms. All these euphemisms we use are the stories that we have. But the constraints, the things that go into saying you can't go here and you can't go there and you can't go there, that those are the real things to focus on. And what are the constraints? Well, the constraints are the laws of physics. It's how gravity works, how planets pull each other, how we pull each other with gravity, with electromagnetism. The constraints are when we look at in telescopes and we look at suns, we see how they evolve, we see how they change, we see how they move. It's when we're in our labs and we smash elements together, how do they react with each other? At a particle accelerator, how do they react with each other? These are the constraints. And from these constraints of the natural world, we build our stories. And so when we're talking, for example, about the Big Bang, and it could explode forever, go on forever, it could collapse, those stories are constrained by the natural world. And those stories will change over time. The constraints most likely won't change very much. We'll most likely just be adding more constraints as time goes on. Another example of building constraints, if you look at the book Mormon Doctrine by Bruce R. McConkie, that book was written with mythological constraints. There's a lot of things in that book that are really creative. But the constraints didn't come from the natural world. The constraints came from mythology. An example where those two clash is if in Mormon Doctrine talks about evolution, how it didn't happen. That's because in his mythology, death didn't happen till after Adam and Eve, and that's how he constrained how he wrote. If we look at the earth, though, if we use natural constraints, finding dinosaur bones, stuff like that, those constraints will give a different story. Anyway, big idea. What are your constraints? And then you see the stories that result. So, one of the things I wanted to talk about is sometimes a lot of these ideas are so contemporary, so changing right now that it's hard to keep track of everything going on. Sometimes it's useful to go back a couple of hundred years to help understand how these ideas evolve and how they change. So back in the 1800s, it was believed that the universe that we live in was infinite and the universe was static. Anyway, if you think about an infinite static universe, there's a paradox that arises, because if in the night sky, if the universe is infinite and the universe is static, every direction you look, there should be a star. And if there's a star in every direction you look, there should be no darkness at night. So obviously there's darkness at night, so that's the paradox. How can you have an infinite universe that's static, yet have a night sky that's dark? Well, there's a poem published by Edgar Allan Poe in 1848, Eureka, a prose poem. And I won't read it because I can't read out loud very well, but in it, Edgar Allan Poe suggests that the reason that there's dark at night is because the stars are so far away that the light has never reached us. Well, anyway, they knew that light had a finite speed at that time, but what Edgar Allan Poe is sort of suggesting is that the universe isn't infinite in time. Anyway, that ended up being the solution to this problem. If you have a dynamic universe that has a beginning of time, you can have a dark sky, whereas a universe that's both infinite and static shouldn't have a dark sky.
Hi, this is Seth Lamb. I'm recording for SHONE Part 2, Build a Universe. We were assigned to listen to this short section that is really the introduction to Short History of Nearly Everything. The first time I ever listened to Short History of Nearly Everything, I was still very much believing member of the Mormon Church. I found all of this amazing Big Bang Theory stuff to be really almost faith-affirming in God. I believed in a scientific God, a God that pretty much touched play on this gigantic Big Bang process, and everything that resulted from it, all the forces that made it happen, were all part of his plan, that he touched play and stepped back, and as a God of science, he controlled the laws of physics and gravity and all of those things because he was all-seeing and all-knowing. It's interesting listening to it now. I call myself a hopeful agnostic, but realizing that first time I listened to it, I didn't really take the time to try to understand what was being said. I just heard it as miraculous and really left it at that. It was miraculous. It was beautiful. I don't need to understand how it works because it's bigger than me. I'm not saying that I just listen to this and totally get why and what. Physics isn't my forte. I'm more of a water or wastewater kind of guy. Modern day poop smith over here. I think the biggest thing about the Big Bang Theory and about this chapter is really kicked off by my inability and humankind's inability to understand just the magnitude of how big the universe is, how old the universe is, how almost to me now I say insignificant we as a species seem compared to how old and gigantic all of this really is.
Seth, that's similar to how I felt about it too. But it's really bleak then to think about the things that we're doing minute to minute, day to day. Yeah, it's just a speck in this huge thing we get lost in. And when you're doing this comparing, I guess that's the Stuart Smalley compare and despair. It just seems like we don't have any significance. But maybe another way of looking at it is like the cells in our body, are they significant to us or not? Because like they're a part of us. And when they're healthy and they're doing their thing, it's all good. But, then there's this whole cancer thing that could really have an impact and a significant impact. And, are we something like that to the universe? We are part of the universe. Like we're made up of the same stuff of the universe. So we are the universe. We are each other. We are everything. Now it's sounding like a Beatles song.
I am he as you are, he as you are, me, and we are all together.
But, so as I've been going through this and listening to all of your comments and, trying to put this project together, this is one of those things I've struggled with. How significant are we or not? And I'm kind of falling on the side of I think there's more significance to us and what we are than we really know and than we really understand. And so instead of sucking away the significance, it kind of adds a new, different, complicated layer of significance to it. And part of that is wanting to be more open to other people and open to the things that are similar between all of us, because we are all connected in these ways and yet so separate and so diverse, especially lately. I don't know. Now I'm getting into my rambling phase. I'll stop. But I just wanted to say, I don't think that we have to think that we're insignificant as a part of this huge universe. And that's something that it brought some hope to me. So I wanted to try and share that if I can.
I say, did you hear the latest episode of Infants on Thrones? H7. Shh.
Hit? Oh yes, and I rather enjoyed it. That Randy fellow sure has an artistic way of painting in expletives. R2.
Miss? Shh. That he does. If only there was a way to listen to Infants episodes earlier and commercial-free, and to gain access to interactive bonus content like video blog posts and other things. H9.
Hit! Well, you could always join the Infants Patreon page.
Shh.
Apparently they aren't going to stop talking about it until everyone has joined.
Shh.
D2.
Miss, well, they may turn off most of their audience that way. H11.
Hit! Only those who don't really care that much about keeping the infants around. A1?
You just convinced me to sign up for Patreon. And also...
You sank my battleship. The game you can play anywhere. Battleship.
And Infants on Thrones. Hey, want to listen to Infants on Thrones without these annoying little self-promoting, come on already and join us over on Patreon commercial thingies? Well, then come on over already and join us on Patreon, because for as little as $1 per episode, you can listen to commercial-free episodes, have access to special Patreon-only bonus content, and most importantly, bask in that warm, glowing feeling of knowing that you've helped support a podcast that entertains you and that you maybe actually kind of sort of enjoy. So come on, $1 per episode. You can swing that, right? Everybody's doing it.
One big thing that when I start thinking about the universe and the Big Bang Theory that really gets backed up here is the idea of ego. What kind of ego we have as a species, that we're on a 6-7 billion year old planet, and we think we're the most important center of the universe creation that's ever existed in a universe that's 13.7 billion years old. We have been around for what, a couple 100,000 years, maybe? It's always just mind-boggling, the kind of ego that we've developed, that we think the Earth revolves around us, and it maybe really shows our our inability to wrap our minds around this thing. And it kind of reminds me at one point where he was talking the analogy of a two-dimensional person being put into a three-dimensional space and being asked, looking for a corner that they're used to finding and coming back to their origin place eventually and being very confused. I'm not sure why I'm here. I'm not sure what I'm looking at. That's a lot when we start talking about the universe, that we err on the side of ignorance very quickly and saying, oh, I just don't understand that. I really appreciate Short History of Nearly Everything because it helps contextualize some of that, and a lot of it talks about how little we knew and how much we know now. And I think a lot of it's about how much we still don't know and how we're cutting those wafers of time down trying to understand what happened. And it reminds me, I was in high school. We were on the bus traveling to some sporting event, and me and a bunch of Mormons sat in the back and started talking about the circle of eternity and God and his God and his God, and everyone making worlds of their own and multiple universes, and all tying it back into religion. And we felt so deep. And then right when I was thinking those thoughts, he talked about how it's almost close to religious, some of the questions that they're asking about the Big Bang Theory. They talked about these forces like gravity, photons, light, particles suddenly appearing at the beginning of the universe. That sounds a lot like when I was listening to this the first time. That was just confirmation of God's creation, that things just came to being, that it all just suddenly happened. And so it was interesting now just talking about how we were able to get down to those points and see how those things were created and how much we still have to learn. Another thing that I was really struck by talking about the creation of the universe ties back into that idea of ego and how we're the most important thing. Something that I think we easily do as humans is we think we're the most important. We think we're the only thing. We think the best thing. And, we interpret this as us being blessed or us having the most. And it's like the quote was exactly right. Nobody has counted the failed attempts at a universe. And what this comes down to is everything's probable. It's easy for us to be where we're at in this perfect world for us in a Goldilocks zone and say that we're a miracle, but really we're just a probability. And even if we are improbable, that doesn't mean we're impossible. It just means that we're less likely to have occurred given the circumstances. And I don't even know. That's the crazy thing, is we don't even know how improbable we are. We have no way of testing that. We have no way of seeing. And I think they have done some tests, and they do say that we should see other signs of life, that we aren't that improbable. And if we're talking about other signs of life, we should probably treat ourselves more as, the average or the median than we necessarily would be talking about us being, the 1% or 0.1% or even much, much less. And it's really interesting when we talk about this, especially tying back to where we used to talk about how there's no way we could explain how everything came to be. A lot of times when we talk about science, people use the paradigm that they learn in religion, that it's all about the answers, when they're talking about science. And science is really all about the questions. It's all about developing questions and testing them and refining them and developing new questions. And it's all about figuring out if we're asking the right questions, because a lot of times answers do us nothing unless we have the right questions that help back those up, especially when we're talking about the Big Bang Theory. It happened so long ago. It's not like we can observe it. We have to figure out what questions we can ask of the data we do have before we're even able to jump to conclusions of what we found. It's amazing to see how far we have come just based on being able to develop those questions. A lot of that ties back into the fact that we are here. We're on an Earth that is a good climate for us. We're a species that has survived. There's 6 numbers that govern our universe according to them, and everything right now is just right so far. And it makes it easiest for us to assume, we are blessed or we are perfect or everything is here because of a bigger meaning. But that doesn't necessarily mean true. I mean, he's right. Gravity could be proved to be too strong. It could collapse the universe. I mean, we have been here such a short period of time that I don't even think we can draw conclusions about why we'll be around, if we'll be around. I mean, we're a blip. And, space curves. It's boundless and infinite. We can't even understand our galaxy. And I love the quote, queerer than we suppose and queerer than we can suppose. It's just something that we can't even wrap our heads around. As we learn more, as we use science to prove a lot of these things, I think we're getting there and we're able to figure that out. But right now, it's amazing the leaps that we're making, but also how little we know about the world around us. And to me, it brings me hope. A lot of people think, is it bleak to think we're an insignificant species on a perfectly placed rock for the time being? That's possibly. I mean, I guess some could take as bleak. I think it's amazing and it's great and it's fantastic, but it's no more amazing or more great or fantastic than any other planet, any other form of life that may not have ever existed because it was in the wrong place. It's just probable. It's what happened. The universe is operating by chaos. It's operating by expanding forces and gases, and it's just so much bigger than we can ever understand. And I really hope anybody who hears that right there goes, yeah, he's not a physicist. He doesn't know what the hell he's talking about. But that's okay. I don't know what I'm talking about. But that doesn't leave this stuff from not being really neat and really cool to listen to. And so my big takeaway from this section is just how big, how old, how amazing this universe is, how much we do know, but how little we really do know, and how people will devote lifetimes to trying to better understand the universe and how big it is. I mean, they talked about it being 1 times 10 to the 24th, or no, one was 24 miles across, and the meta universe is larger still. That's incredible. That's amazing. And I hopefully look forward to us learning as much as we can in my lifetime and our race perpetuating across the galaxy if we can. I love learning about things like this, even if I do struggle at times to wrap my head around it, because I don't know if all of us can wrap our heads around how absolutely impressive and gargantuan the universe is.
Okay, Glenn, I know I'm going long, buddy, but bear with me. 15 minutes is kind of short for the mind bomb of that chapter. All right, man. So I'm going to address your cool lab thought experiment. What would it be like on another planet? What kind of senses would we have? Well, if the, maybe imagine that this was a planet with a lot more plate tectonic activity than we have. I imagine that for survival, you would need to be a lot more sensitive to the movements of the Earth, the tremors of the Earth. So perhaps we would, the inhabitants of that planet would have extra, more sensitive detection of motion of the Earth, or perhaps maybe it's more of an arid, deserty planet, and so your ability to find vegetation and water is a lot more important than here, and so perhaps they have a better sense of smell, that they can smell water or smell vegetation. I mean, the possibilities, you can really run wild with them. I imagine that everyone would look blue, like the people in the movie Avatar. They would fly around on dragons. They would have this cool little, kind of fiber optic connection port on the end of their ponytails that they could sync up with their flying dragons and, kind of communicate and be one being with their dragon and fly around. I imagine they would, make a circle around the tree of life and chant mantras and sing songs and, do that sort of shit. I mean, I don't know what you want me to do with the Cool Lab, aka Collab, thought experiment, because you can just fucking kind of imagine anything. I mean, scientists tell us that we don't have to have carbon-based life forms. We could have silicon-based life forms. So, maybe there's a planet that's all, a bunch of computer chips and shit. And they're, computers. They don't even fucking need computers because they fucking are computers. It could be that awesome. Maybe our fucking iPhone 7, they would look at that and go, oh, that's, Stone Age shit for us. I don't know, man. I've had almost a full bottle of wine tonight. Feeling pretty good. Loving this chapter of the Bryson book. Short history of nearly everything is the bomb. So, Ainsworth out.
I think you stole that from Ryan Seacrest. That's kind of his closing, right? Seacrest out. I mean, come on, Ainsworth. But I'm gonna be out now too. So Look, there is an extended Easter egg coming your way with more listener response to that first part of A Short History of Nearly Everything. Hope you enjoy it. But basically, the episode's over now, except that it isn't really because there's an extended Easter egg, so you can keep listening to that if you want to. It's there for you to... I'm just messing around.
Hi. This is Kaylin from Tacoma, Washington, and I like to listen to Infants on Thrones while playing fetch with my cat, Sherlock. You can comment on this episode on the website, infantsonthrones.com, and if you really like what you hear, give the Quorum a 5-star rating and write a short review on iTunes. I did. Anyone for the closing prayer?
Hey, this is Greg. A little bit about me. I'm a chemist, go Utes, and I've been working in chemistry for 10 years now. And I've really been enjoying this book so far. It takes so much information and makes it so accessible. Your personal background isn't important. If you study science professionally or if you're an enthusiast, even if you've heard it all before in another format, this stuff should amaze you. And it's not just that the facts themselves are amazing, but it's just astounding that we know any of this stuff in the first place. If this book motivates you to do anything, it should be to ask 3 questions. How did we learn all this stuff? How do we know that it's right? And if it is right, then what else might be true? What does it all mean? Now, I wanted to kind of share a story that kind of came to mind when I was thinking about these kinds of things. Some time ago, I was listening to the book, The Selfish Gene, and there was one part that just blew my mind, and I had to tell someone. I told a co-worker, and keep in mind that he's still a strong LDS believer. But this section of the book was talking about genetic relatedness and altruism, and I'm going to simplify it a lot, and my apologies to people who know more about this than me. But the general idea is that the more genes you share with someone, the more you're going to act in a way to help them, or at least the more you'll be more likely to act in a way to help them. If we look at most sexually reproducing things, you'll be 50% related to a parent and 50% related to a sibling, and you can see that the more you're related to somebody in that sense, the more willing you'll be to help take care of them. Now, it's different for wasps and bees and ants, which is what the section goes on to describe. In a hive, there's a female queen, you have male drones, and female workers. And the way that their reproduction works out, it causes the female workers to be 75% related to each other. They're more related to each other than they are to their own queen and to their own brother male drones. Now, this theory requires that they should then act in ways to benefit themselves more than the queen and more than the drones. Turns out to be true. The queens lay equal amounts of female and male embryos, and the female workers sabotage a portion of the male embryos. And about 75% of the births end up being female workers, which is the same as their genetic relatedness. So, I told all this to my colleague, and his response was, "Wow, it really makes you think about how the spirit gets in there and joins the body and maybe combines with the DNA," and he went on for a little bit like that. And I don't mean to make fun of him, that's not my point. I bet everyone here remembers a time when they've said something like that. He was genuinely interested. There was that moment of being awestruck by cool new information. But what he said is the opposite of the question you should ask. He didn't ask, well, if this is true, then what else should be true? He did what any good Mormon boy is supposed to do. He remembered that to be learned is good as long as you hearken to the counsel of God. And And that keeps you tethered down. It keeps you on the leash. And granted, you can still learn a lot with that mindset, but you're less likely to be the one going off and making new discoveries, and you'll probably end up rejecting a lot of the things that you get taught at the same time. I mean, what if the early astronomers looked up at the sky with their telescopes and they saw craters on the moon, and they saw the phases of Venus and the rings on Saturn, and then they said, wow, worlds without number, the scriptures are true, and then packed it in for the night and did nothing else after that. This is why the church teaches to ask faithful questions instead of questioning. You know, you read the scriptures, you listen to General Conference, and those combined make a statement on how the universe is. But this explanation is so fragile and self-contradictory that they had to invent another rule that you're not allowed to ask questions. So, I mean, let's take this and think back to this section of short history. You've got one scientist who postulates the Big Bang. Another scientist says, if your theory is true, then the laws of physics require that we could observe cosmic microwaves here on Earth today. He didn't try to conform data to fit the theory. He challenged the theory to conform to observable data. I mean, compare that to a Sunday school discussion about archaeological evidences for the Book of Mormon. You know, you can almost forgive Mormonism for getting nearly everything wrong. It's bad enough that it arrived at all the wrong conclusions, but even worse is how it arrived at those conclusions. There was one man who said he had all the answers and who would punish anyone who questioned him along the way. And it's been said so many times that it's become a cliche that you should question everything. But, it's true, and, hopefully that what we've heard on short history and maybe some of the things that I've said can
around
convince folks on that. Okay, signing off.
You gotta love it when they do things like this. It might be 10 billion years ago, or 20 billion years ago, or somewhere in the middle. Yeah, let's say 13.7 billion years ago. And once you add that point, it's like, oh yeah, that feels certain, like there's some certainty there. Around 7 minutes in, I always find it fascinating when people in the English-speaking world aren't aware of something that's going on in, I guess, Russia? Is that where this Gamov guy was from? Yeah, Russian-born. I don't know if he was living there when he did his research, but it just makes me think, like there is research in all sorts of different languages that people aren't reading. I think Carl Sagan, he talks about this in Cosmos, the book, anyway. And I forget if it's the narrator or Ellie Arroway who brings it up, but, we tend to think like the frontier of scientific knowledge is a unified frontier, when really it's pretty jagged, because you have this problem of language, like something that gets discovered in Russia in the 1960s doesn't come to light in the English-speaking world till the early 2000s or something like this, or some guy didn't publish his German notebooks or whatever, and this happens, I think a lot. And so it goes a little ways to dispelling the idea that scientific knowledge is always at this, edge, when, you really do have this problem of language, because how many scientists in the English-speaking world really do the work to learn Russian or Mandarin or whatever else they need to know, Spanish, Arabic? It's a hard thing to do. Starting around 9 minutes and 20 seconds, going to 10 minutes or so. I've got a big rant here, so I'm not gonna re-record it or anything. I'm just gonna kind of riff and take from it anything that you might find interesting. So here he's talking about, what is this? He says, incidentally, disturbance from cosmic background radiation is something we all have experienced. Oh no, I won't worry about that. I was going to make a comment about the humor in this book and how sometimes it's kind of funny and other times it's kind of lame. But The next paragraph says, although everyone calls it the Big Bang, many books caution us not to think of it as an explosion in the conventional sense. It was rather a vast, sudden expansion on a whopping scale. And I think that's fascinating because whenever scientists tell people, like, oh, no, don't think about it like a bang, don't think about it like an explosion, think about it as like an expansion, then what they're doing is not presenting empirical data. What they're doing is telling people what metaphors to use. And there's nothing wrong with that, but that's a problem of language again. It's not one of experimentation and math and statistical analysis. It's just a different activity, which is, inextricable to the activity of science, and it needs to be appreciated. But, I think oftentimes the world gets split up into words and numbers, and like poets and writers and humanists and whoever else, they work in words, and scientists, they work in numbers, and numbers, that's tough. That's solid. There's always a right answer. You can check the back of the book, whereas poetry is just flimsy, mamsy-pamsy silliness. So I think that's interesting that he would make that point. The next bit here, he says that we don't actually know what this Big Bang, quote-unquote, was. Some people call it a false vacuum, a scalar field, a vacuum energy. He says, some people believe this about it, some people believe that, and I don't doubt that each of these people have reasons to believe what they believe, that they have data which they're checking, but they still, as soon as you commit yourself to a theory, and a controversial one, because it sounds like there's quite a few theories out there, you will always run into the problem of potentially reinforcing that theory because of data you already have. And, this is the paradigm problem that Kuhn talks about and others. And, again, this is a problem of the edge of science is more like storytelling than it is like, okay, we have hard empirical data which disproves other people's theories and seems to support my own theory. And you can present that, but it's kind of hard to ultimately disregard the fact that people really are just telling stories. They're telling myths to each other, even if they have good reasons to tell those myths. People that talked about the creation of the world thousands of years ago had good reason to tell their myths. They saw the sky in the ocean as two bodies of water, and that makes sense because water comes down from the sky and water is on the ground. So that's why in Genesis you read about the God splitting the firmament, separating the waters and whatnot. This also reminds me of a story. I was at Thanksgiving a couple weeks ago. We had it at the house of a professor of physics. His name's John Howell at the University of Rochester. He's my cousin's brother-in-law. And he specializes in quantum optics. And he was trying to explain some of these things to me. And he's an excellent explainer, but I'm not a very sciencey person myself, so I was having a hard time keeping up. But he explained to me photon entanglement, which I'm not going to try and explain it here, but the point is that when a photon gets split into two, I guess, smaller photons, I don't know what the exact description would be, and then those two smaller protons are on opposite sides of the universe. Well, if something happens to one, it'll happen to the other. And this is important because quantum mechanics aren't strictly localized, that they can be universalized. And he was talking about a friend of his, a colleague, another professor of physics at another university, who sees all the same data that his colleagues do. He's not a dumb guy. He's a professional scientist, And he doesn't buy into this idea that quantum mechanics extend beyond the local environment. And he just thought, wow, like I don't know why he won't buy into this, because we have the data and whatnot. And to me, the takeaway there is that's a good question. Why wouldn't somebody buy into it? I guess there's something about scientific evidence and scientific data that isn't on the face of it obvious. You have to have some type of framework of interpretation or worldview already in place that allows you to make sense of scientific data. And scientific data can certainly reconfigure your worldview or interpretive framework or what have you, but that framework is still there, even if it's dynamic. And so it's a bit difficult to assume that one person will see objective data in the same way that another person will, even if they've both been trained in the same hyper-specialized field of quantum optics and physics. So, yeah, but this guy, John Howell, he does really interesting stuff like make physical objects invisible. So science is still cool, even if we don't understand how it works. Around 24 minutes in, I just love that this term, the Big Bang, apparently came about because somebody was mocking the idea. It's funny, the things that stick. It's almost like, I think I heard Brian Regan talk once about how Einstein, the way we use that name in modern parlance, doesn't do honor to the man's genius, because we only ever use it sarcastically. We're like, oh, look at this Einstein. So a word that's supposed to mean someone really smart just means somebody really stupid.
In many ways, this section really gets at the dichotomy of religious and scientific worldviews. Bill Bryson here is essentially explaining the concept and the question that most religions try to answer, which is, where did we come from, why are we here, and where are we going? And I feel like religion attempts to answer this question in a qualitative way of how can you, how does it make you feel the best? How can you create the best earthly experience and relationships? Whereas science is attempting to answer the question in a very quantitative way of formula-based, having answers, having definitions of the what, why, and the how these things are occurring or have occurred in the past. But essentially, they're both attempting to answer the exact same question. The concept of going from nothing to 10 million, however millions of a size of a universe is almost impossible to comprehend. And I think it creates this dissonance that makes you think, how that's not possible. And without further understanding, which at this point the author Bill Bryson is not going into, it makes it difficult to embrace this theory. Especially for one who's not inclined to embrace scientific theories over religious theories. I feel like this is one of the harder parts for me to embrace, because when you look at everything that had to go right, everything that had to occur in the right order with the right percentages and at the right time, it all occurred in such a way to create this perfect environment that would allow for life on Earth, in a solar system, in a galaxy. It just feels there's a discomfort that happens. Like I don't understand the mechanics by which this happened and how it could have happened in such a way. Now, Bill Bryson tries to explain it and saying, well, we don't know how many times this didn't occur or didn't happen. And he's right, but that doesn't make me feel more comfortable. It just creates more discomfort, more dissonance of why this happened for us and why are we the lucky ones. And I feel like this is where a higher power, or the tendency to believe in a higher power to explain away all the things we don't understand and we can't understand and we don't know, it becomes much easier to say, well, God did this. It was God's hand. He understands perfectly. All the things that we can understand, don't worry, he understands it. And I feel like this, not only Mormonism, but religion in general, especially the Christian religion, this is where it fits. It explains the things that are difficult, that without a PhD, without a study of how all these things work, it becomes very difficult to understand. And I better understand why people say, God did it all. Because that is so difficult to comprehend. The slim chance we had to ever exist, yet we do, and here we are. It's hard to grasp the concept of singularity and how it is so small, and where is it located? What is like the dimension it's in? How does it expand to create? That for me, that becomes one of the most difficult things to visualize, and we're very visual people, and our world around us is very visual and very tactile. And so to hear him, Bill Bryson, talking about this completely new and radical shift in what is a dimension makes it difficult to understand. And I feel like this is where a more simplistic, a more naturalistic point of view is easier to accept, to swallow, and then to live by. Like the concept of singularity is blowing my mind. I can't help but think that the author is poking a little bit fun of flat earthers, those crazy folk who believe the earth is flat because they only believe what their eyes allow them to see. And I think that speaks to a much broader issue that the author's trying to address. I find it interesting that Bill Bryson talks about how space assumes heavenly dimensions. I feel like he's relying on the only words he has in a language that is so wrapped in religious words and adjectives. That's the only words you can use to describe what is occurring. And I think that's where a lot of confusion comes in. Well, looking back at the history of mankind, a lot of our mythology was created to explain things that we couldn't explain ourselves. So we created myths, we created legends, we created religions, supernatural powers to help explain away things that we couldn't explain with our own natural senses. And I feel like here it's very fascinating that he uses that word to explain something that's so not that word. Timelines are interesting because science is okay with uncertainties. The scientific mind or scientific method is okay with not having a specific answer. It creates more questions, which are continued to be researched to fine-tune the answer. A religious mindset is a little bit different, and I feel like this is one of the major separations between religious mindset and a scientific mindset is religion tries to explain the gaps or the things that we don't understand in mythical ways, such as the creation and an exact timeline of 5,000 years, because we can't really understand beyond 5,000 years as far as human record or written history. We just say that's about when it happened. And I feel like this is one of the major issues when you're trying to embrace a scientific mindset. You have to embrace uncertainty and be okay with that. And I think that is one of the more difficult concepts to accept when you leave a fundamentalist religion, one such as Mormonism, where everything is described and prescribed in exact methods, exact ways, whereas we're taught exactly how the earth was created, exactly who created, exactly what the timelines, well, kind of exactly in the timelines. But so this I think is a microcosm of the larger picture of the difference between a scientific thought and a religious thought. In a world. Just kidding. This is John Brown from Bluffdale, Utah, and we're going to go through the thought experiment. So I picture one of those sci-fi or pseudo-science books that I read as a TBM, the Dan Brown book, where, and I'm spacing on the name, where he goes to the accelerator in Switzerland or wherever it's at, and he finds antimatter. And it makes me think of kind of that idea, and I'm in this really cool scientific and really cool futuristic space where scientists have discovered the God particle and figured out how to create universes. And I can imagine being there and volunteering, because I'm an eager individual and I want to experience all that life has to offer, even if it's not life on our planet. And as I go through this experience, and as I'm beamed into this tiny little world, then my mind is blown, because I'm very ethnocentric. I'm very planet-centric. I think everything should be as it is here on our Earth. And I lack the vocabulary, and I lack the intellect to even understand and comprehend what is happening, similar to what I imagine would happen if a creature of an intelligent species came to our Earth. Their ability to comprehend and to understand what is happening and the cultural implications and all the different things that are going on, because if you lose the basic forces of Earth, or of what you're used to, and you're forced to try to observe an entire new dimension, I don't know that an individual is capable of that in a short period of time. And let's just say that I'm there and I'm able to spend a good, let's say, a couple years on this planet, and I'm able to slowly observe and understand and let my mind wrap around the different forces and the intelligent creatures that are on this planet, assuming there are some that don't look like me, that don't even have a head or arms. They're completely different. They've evolved over whatever time period that they were given or sped up to be given. And they are now creatures that resemble nothing like human beings. And my mind can't, excuse the only words I have, but humanize them. It doesn't allow me to accept them as other beings that are of worth. And I think that detracts from my experience, because I can't even begin to relate, to have empathy, to have compassion for these other living beings, because they don't look like me in any shape or form. And as I'm extracted from this environment, I don't even have the words to explain to my fellow researchers who are open-minded, who do want to believe and are willing to change their mind. They can't even understand. I don't have the vocabulary. It's so contextualized. My whole world means nothing without context. And I'm in a world of no context. And so you take me back out of the world of no context, put me back in a world of context. How do I explain a world that had no context? I can't do it. And I feel like as I explain to my fellow researchers what I went through, they're able to grasp certain theories or certain ideas based on their own knowledge of science and physics and biology and all the different disciplines. But as I go to my non-scientific friends and family, I find myself alienated by my experience. Because not only do I not have the words they don't have the understanding, nor do they want to have the understanding, because their world works and makes sense. So their inability to have or their lack of desire to understand something completely paradigm shifting creates a complete end to any conversation I can even begin to have. And I start to feel lonely. I start to feel as if I'm experiencing something that no one else has, which is true. I'm experiencing the loneliness of knowledge. And not in the way that I think a lot of people will relate to, I know that God doesn't exist because XYZ. No, it's a complete loneliness because my worldview and my ethnocentric views have been shattered, and I have started to believe in things that are so different at their core, that are fundamentally different than my friends and family, that I feel like I no longer have anything in common with them. I can no longer speak to them about what they ate for dinner or where they went shopping, because I realize that those are constructs of a world that is made up, that we happen to make up. And as I live out the rest of my life, I'm sad. I don't want to go back to a world where I don't belong, but I all of a sudden feel like I don't belong in the world where I grew up.
Hey guys, I'm Brian. I'm a food science grad student over at UNC Chapel Hill, and let's see, I have an emphasis in protein chemistry and nutrition, and just finishing up a master's degree right now. So that's me. All right, so when listening to this suit analogy, it kind of reminded me of a mistake that a lot of Eskimos make when they're talking about science, and that is they forget about the gambler's fallacy. So if I were to tell you that there is someone out there that's won the lottery twice, and there's lots of people that have won the lottery twice, and I would ask, well, what are the odds of that happening? And you would think about it, well, it must be astronomically high, right? Well, not necessarily, because the odds of one person winning the lottery twice are really low. But if you think about how many people there are out there, and how many times some people buy lottery tickets, and how many lotteries there are out there, if you start adding all these things up over years and years and years, the likelihood of someone winning the lottery twice is actually really likely. It's almost guaranteed with so many people that someone's going to win the lottery twice every once in a while. And the same might be true about the very laws of physics in the universe itself. If there's a lot of universes trying to be formed, I mean, who knows how many are out there, but if there's a lot, then one universe where all the laws of physics are perfect, even if it's infinitesimally small for it to work out, and we can't know any of that, but even if it were, then there's still always the possibility that it worked out right. In fact, maybe it's probable, just because there are so many universes out there. And I think it's most often that people accuse evolution of being impossible because it's so improbable, and it's the law, it's the exact same thing. It's the gambler's fallacy. Well, if you think about all the worlds out there that are the right distance from the sun, I mean, we already know of quite a few of them. Then what are the odds that a single one of them has life, that a single one of them built up the nitrogen chain correctly and started developing into complex organisms? It may be inevitable. In fact, it seems like it would be inevitable, just based on what we know about likelihoods. And so I think that this can be applied to science, and it should be applied, but I think also it often happens when people talk about spiritual experiences. People often commit the gambler's fallacy. So I remember people on their mission, or like, for instance, me on my mission. I went to a European country where the odds of finding someone that are interested in the gospel are like 0, right? But I remember one day I prayed And then I looked up and I saw someone, and I knew that was the person. And I walked right up to them, and I bore my testimony, and then I carried their bags up the stairs for them, and then they were baptized, 5 months later. And it seemed like fate. It seemed like, what are the odds of that ever happening? And the odds were very small, right? But if you think about it with the gambler's fallacy paradigm, I prayed like freaking 45 times a day, right? I saw people all the time. I talked to thousands of Europeans, and that happened to me once. So if you think about it from that perspective, what are the odds that I happened to find one person that was okay with all of it? Well, might have been pretty good. In fact, if you look at our statistics and our mission, it was pretty expected that, you'll find someone, you'll find one person that'll be interested. And I think that's the gambler's fallacy, something that often Eskimos forget about. Okay, am I the only one here that just does not understand that at all? The idea that there can be something before time, does that imply that it's before causality? Does that mean that there was no cause and effect? And if so, how could anything have been instigated? How could a Big Bang have been instigated if there was no cause and effect? Or does it simply mean that it was before we could reckon time, or that time had a different nature? And I mean, if Einstein's theory of relativity breaks down because of the massive amount of gravity, then, I mean, what is that? What does that even mean? It's so much crazier than anything dreamt up by like Joseph Smith or anyone else. It's crazy. But it's what the numbers tell us. I mean, it's what the models tell us, I guess. That's just nuts. This is crazy for me to think about, that forces like electromagnetism or the small force, or concepts like gravity, that they were created at this point in the Big Bang. It's kind of mind-numbing, but to me it's really an interesting contrast between the Mormon concept of God, because with the Mormon concept of God, God himself always operates inside of these laws. He has a set of rules that he follows, and he'll always follow those. But when it comes to the Big Bang actually made its own rules right at the start, and now there are these laws that are fundamental to our universe. But the idea that they had an origin, it's just kind of, it just goes to show that reality is even crazier than you could dream up if you were trying. So I grew up right in Utah Valley, right in the center of it all. And I remember learning, not just from my dad, but also from my science teacher, randomly enough, that the Big Bang was invented by atheists to disprove God. And so for the longest time, I never looked at the Big Bang, kind of like how Mormons never look at evolution. I just never touched it, because I thought it was some atheist propaganda, and it couldn't have made any sense. It wasn't until college, when I started digging into it for some of my science classes, that I realized, oh my gosh, this is really interesting stuff. Started diving in and realized it had nothing to do with God. They couldn't have cared less about God. These physicists were dealing with something so much more important than Joseph Smith's first vision, or his little plan of salvation with the sun and the moon and the stars. He was dealing with something. These physicists were dealing with something so much bigger than that, and I think it's sad that something so glorious, something so beautiful and mysterious and complicated to understand, is just, quite frankly, cock-blocked by Mormons that are just so concerned with their little views of reality. They can't even fit in fundamental truths of physics that can change people's lives and completely alter your view of reality. Though I guess maybe that's why Mormons are scared of it. Maybe that's why former leaders of the church were so scared of the Big Bang. It's because, not so much because it disproves, or it provides a reality where you don't need God, but maybe it goes beyond that. Maybe it's that it's so much more exciting than God. It's so much more interesting than God. It's so much more rewarding than God. It's delicious to the taste and very desirable, you know. This is what I love about science, is you can make a prediction and then you can test it. You can test your hypotheses. So someone says, hey, I think there's cosmic radiation, and because of the energy of the universe, it should be converted into, microwaves, whatever. And then someone else is making a giant telescope and they're like, hey, I found this weird thing. You can prove your theory with data. You can support your theory with data. And that's what science is all about. And it's something that for me was so fundamentally lacking in religion, is when you test the hypothesis that Joseph Smith was a prophet or that Thomas S. Monson was a prophet, you look at their predictions. Did they come true? Some of them, sort of. But if you want scientific accuracy, then you need to have testable hypotheses. And that's awesome. I love that.
Okay, this is for SHONE, episode 2, Building a Universe. Just a couple observations on this one. As I'm listening to this and reading through the chapter, I don't understand a lot of it. I don't have a strong science background or any kind of science background, really. And so when I hear a lot of this stuff, he goes on and on. He mentions several times about how some of these things are just incomprehensible, right? Like the singularity is so small, the entire universe so small that you have to you wouldn't be able to see it without a microscope. That to me is just incomprehensible. I can't understand how everything could be so compact like that. And then just the sheer size of the universe as it is now, so big that, again, it's just incomprehensible. Are we at the center of the universe, or are we not at the center of the universe? It bends. Can you ever get to the edge of the universe? We don't know, right? There's so many things, so many unknowns here that it's hard for me, a layperson, to really understand this. And on one level, I almost look at it as, I have to go on faith. These guys that obviously know much more than I do about this stuff, they've got it figured out. They can show me some equations and rationalize it, and I shouldn't say rationalize it. They can try to explain it using their language, but the language they speak, I don't understand it. So the version we're getting here is almost like this watered down, dumbed down version of what they're trying to explain, and I just can't wrap my head around it sometimes, and it reminds me of religion in some ways, I'm just told by the people that understand that this is the way the universe is, and I should accept it on faith. But the big difference here is, in my mind, it can be proven. Not even necessarily proven, but there's some real rational thought that has got into this. They bounce these ideas off of each other. They get shot down. They change. They evolve. As our understanding of the universe and the world around us increases, our perception of the universe is clarified, and we understand it more. We don't have to go back to, even 50 years ago or 100 years ago or 1,000 years ago and say, oh, they had, the people back then had some kind of innate knowledge that we just don't possess anymore. We don't have to do that. We can use the resources and the tools that we have on hand and understand this stuff. If I really applied myself and really dug in deep and tried to understand this stuff, I feel like I could get to the point where some of these guys are, some of these scientists and these big thinkers, where I could understand the concepts and the thought process and the proofs that go into this stuff to understand it. Whereas in religion, I never had that. I just had, at a certain point, you get to the point where you say, you just got to have faith. Well, you don't necessarily just have to have faith here. They have the intellectual rigor that has gone into this to back up these theories. Or at least I assume they do. Again, for me, it goes back to faith, even some of this. But that's only because I have not put in the time and the effort to research and understand this stuff. So on one hand, I do get some comfort knowing that somebody has done a lot of this stuff. But on the other hand, I feel that it's kind of the same as when I was in the church and I did the same thing. Somebody has researched this stuff. Somebody has learned it. Somebody understands this stuff. I'm just going to go with them. So it's a little bit of a catch-22 when I read some of this stuff. It reminds me very much of when I was a TBM, a believer. Okay, right about the 16-minute mark, he's talking about this perfect universe. Talking about how if things were off just a little bit, if gravity was just a little bit stronger, or maybe a little bit weaker, if the cocktail of molecules that make up the universe were just a little bit off, heavier in one area and not so much in the other, the universe would be a totally different place, and that we wouldn't fit in the universe. We wouldn't be able to survive here. Long ago, in a lifetime, in another life, I would have looked at that and said, well, that right there is proof that this was created for us. I mean, how else would we be here if this wasn't all perfectly timed and perfectly in balance, this entire universe for us to be here? But the way he talks about it here, one of the scientists says, the universe could be something that just happened. This may have happened millions or billions or trillions of times before, with the Big Bang and the universe coming into existence and then collapsing back in on itself into another singularity and then banging again, And this may have happened over and over and over again, where things weren't as balanced as they are now. And there was no spark for life. There was no chance for life to emerge and grow and evolve into any kind of anything. Who knows? Maybe this is the shittiest universe yet. But all the others were amazing and even more balanced and more conducive to life than this universe is. We just don't know. So to say that the universe is so perfectly in tune for life, and there's no way that this could have happened just randomly, well, yeah, it could have. It did. And other universes could have been much better than this. Other universes may have been much worse than this. Universes to come may be even better than this one. We just don't know. But now in my mind, I don't look at that as this is proof of God. This is it just is. Okay, that's all I got for this one. Not too terribly insightful, but hopefully that's what you're looking for, and hopefully it'll get better. Thanks.
So this is JK in Los Angeles, and just as a forward comment, hearing the forward of the audio where the guy is talking about the fact that all the planets are on planes, I can't remember the wording, but it's like almost like it was on purpose or designed or something. I remember when I was, I'm 33 now, when I was about 25, I was losing faith in God quickly, and it was a really horrible experience. And I remember one thing that I could still kind of lean on or cling to, I don't know if cling to is the right word, but something that was still comforting to me was the idea that, maybe the stuff in the church doesn't make sense, maybe there's things here on earth that don't make sense, but when you look into into space, into the universe, there seemed to be order there. And I don't know if order meant design, but there's something about order that was comforting to me. Maybe not that things were created or that they had a purpose, but maybe there is an innate purpose if just because of the way that the systems were set up. Something intelligent about it, something comforting. I don't know if I can explain it any better than that. And what's interesting is that reminds me of something that I remember President Hinckley saying, something to the similar to, man would be better to go outside and look up at the sky and ponder his place in the heavens than watching TV. And I remember hearing that as a teenager and feeling, liking what he said and feeling like it made sense to me, and I connected with that idea that up in the sky there's something bigger than us, and it was almost like it was outside of the church way that he meant it, like go ahead and think about and wonder about what's up there and all the things that we don't understand. And I even remember further, after mentioning President Hinckley, there was a part in the Mountain of the Lord film where I think Wilford Woodruff said something. Oh, it was he was talking to the reporter, and they were looking at the stars at night. And he said, "Yeah, it stirs something in the soul, doesn't it?" And it was a very touching interesting and one of my favorite parts of that movie. Sort of an overall comment that this part of the book reminded me of is I remember seeing Interstellar a couple years ago when it came out, and I talked to a member of my family who will not be named, who I said, I didn't know if I really was into the part where he's kind of in that weird kaleidoscope and he has to push the books to send a message, and it's all about different dimensions. And this member of my family, who I think is probably also very interested in the deep doctrine, said, I thought it was great. I think it's amazing that science is finally catching up to all the things that Joseph Smith was saying 200 years ago. And that just blew my mind. I feel like I'm pretty familiar with a lot of the things that Joseph Smith said, especially the nuttier ones, and maybe not. Maybe there's more that I need to find out. I'm not sure exactly what he was referring to. I remember going out to a bar with my friend later, and this friend is one of my very best friends, and he was a physics major, so he knows a lot about this stuff, and he just laughed and laughed when I told him that comment that this family member had made. Okay, so now referring to the sci-fi thought experiment, the first question, what do you expect to find? What's similar, what's different? Can you explain why? The first thing that pops into my head, imagining this new planet that I've been beamed onto, is that the colors are different. Like maybe it's more like Mars, where the sky is a little more yellow or red, and I see, sand and red rock, and maybe there's water around, but not necessarily. I don't know that I really see any plant life, or it's sort of deserty, red and deserty. I don't know why I imagine it that way. What do I expect to find? I don't know. As far as the scenario goes, it's like a surprise, like or do they say like, oh, the planet you're going to is going to be the right temperature, and you're going to like it, or is it just like, well, we don't know what's going to happen, and maybe you'll come back. Good luck. The second question, coming across the intelligent beings, and they have different senses based on the environment of their planet. What are some of the different senses that these beings have? Why did they evolve to become this way? If I look at it as through Darwinian evolution, these are the ones that survived because they had the mutations that made them behave, or have the body structure that was successful in their environment. It's hard to conceive of different senses and what you could be sensing. At the same time, I feel like, and maybe I've read a little bit on this here or there, that humans have, many more than 5 or even 6 senses that, we perceive of lots of other things that we don't really openly talk about. I don't know. Maybe that'll change soon. Maybe the whole 5 senses idea will go away. The third question, how would I communicate? How would I think it meant to say, how would I explain who I am and where I'm from? I don't know. It starts with observation, right? Like you watch them, you see, what you think is the way that they communicate. Do they use body language with each other? Are they making any noises? Do you have a terrible headache because they're using some kind of telepathy that's giving off noise pollution that you can't hear, but it's about to explode your brain? First you'd have to just spend some time watching and observing, and what do you know isn't that's similar to the scientific theory, right, or the scientific method. And then you would make a hypothesis. Well, I think that they communicate this way, so I will try. I think they communicate by butt wiggles, and this many butt wiggles means, yes, and this many butt wiggles means no, and this many butt wiggles means I'm hungry, and then you would give it a shot, and you would wiggle your butt, and, assuming that they have butts, and of course you'll still have your butt because they'll do a good job at Cool Lab, and see if, you do the right number of butt wiggles, and you get the result that you're looking for, or if, they get angry at you, or stomp on you, or run away because you said something horrible with your butt wiggles. This fourth question, this fourth bullet point, are there also multiple dimensions? Are there, I'm guessing that means beyond 3 or 4, height and width and length and time. Marty, you're not thinking fourth dimensionally. Are there multiple or parallel universes? How would you even know? I don't know. I'm just here at this lab. Why? Apparently I'm already going onto a planet without any kind of preparation. Why am I also having to, come to answer these, deep philosophical questions? It's a lot to ask. So the second to the last bullet point, how would you explain once you return? If you return, okay, this is the part where everybody says, oh, they should have sent a poet. I don't know. Maybe it's completely dark. Maybe you can't see anything there. Maybe none of your 5 or 6 or 10 or 22 senses that we have here on Earth translate to this other place that you went. Maybe it's super similar, and maybe they're they talk about they have a record on metal plates or clay plates or something that talks about when this guy named Jesus came to their planet. Maybe they're all white people on every other planet in the universe. Even in the synthetic universes, it's oh, hey, we're the white Shmeefites, and let us tell you about this guy that came to visit. The last bullet point, I don't know, maybe I wasn't super bought into this thought experiment, and I'm curious to see, I feel like there's something behind it, this is almost a psychological experiment where you can't actually tell them what they're testing, because it'll skew the results, so you have to lie and say oh, we're going to be testing this, but you're actually testing, their patience or something like that. Or maybe not. I don't know. I wouldn't put it past Glenn at all to do something like that.
What? Why? What did I do?
I'm interested to see what other people say. I'm interested to see if people are a lot more creative with it than I am. I feel like I don't know. It's just kind of been off-the-cuff responses, and I'm curious to see what other people say and what it turns out to be.
My name is none of your business. And I like to eat enchiladas while listening to infants on thrones. If you like what they're doing, they're on iTunes, whatever. Give them money on PayPal with a donation, or just say a prayer and love them. Love them like you've never loved nobody before. Because I said so. Anyone for the closing prayer?
Thank you for listening to Infants on Thrones.
Hey, want to listen to Infants on Thrones without these annoying little self-promoting, come on already and join us over on Patreon commercial thingies? Well, then come on over already and join us on Patreon, because for as little as $1 per episode, you can listen to commercial-free episodes, have access to special Patreon-only bonus content, and most importantly, bask in that warm, glowing feeling of knowing that you've helped support a podcast that entertains you and that you maybe actually kind of sort of enjoy. So come on, $1 per episode. You can swing that, right? Everybody's doing it.